My name is Stacy Kirkle. I'm a senior engineering manager here at Databricks in Amsterdam. And we, just to put it out there, are always hiring for all roles here in Amsterdam and in San Francisco. And so I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to our three panelists today so we can talk about women in unified analytics. Let's go ahead and start on the left there with Devin.
My name's Devin. I'm a data engineer at Lloyds Bank, and I've had quite a non-traditional journey into that role, so I didn't study like computer science or anything like that. So it's only over the past 4 years actually that I've transitioned in. I'm just very, very excited for the conversation.
Mamta, you're at Arm Holding. Tell me about you.
So I think I would, first of all, it's a privilege to be here. So it's also a great responsibility because you're on stage and it's a platform to talk about things that are close to your heart. So I thought, what message can I leave you guys with that would inspire you as well go away with ideas? So I would think of myself as a data translator.
Okay.
And I've had various roles in my career, and today I lead a function capability called Operation Research and Decision Analytics at Arm.
Okay.
So we do areas like capacity planning, which talks about investment in our infrastructure, and also for any actionable insights, I would say.
And Carolyn, you're at Wacomp. What is Wacomp?
Well, okay, that's a good start. Well, Wacomp, it's one of the oldest retail company, especially in Dutch. So people who are international, it's a Dutch retail company, and we have been around for almost 67 years now. And we made the digital transformation to the online transformation in the year 2010, and since then we never looked back. So hence my role, product manager as for the data science team at Wacomp, and our focus is to work more on machine learning models that can really transform the shopping experience for our customers from a more inspiration and a personalization aspect.
So let's actually start with you. We were talking last night about how you make those machine learning models inclusive, particularly for the consumer experience. There were lots of things that you were doing there around data sets and then around Shipley models. Tell me more.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so it's a bit interesting what we do because, as I said, we are a retail, online retail company, and we sell basically everything. Fashion, furniture for your house, electronics, everything. So our current focus is on fashion, where we are really focusing on providing more on the inspiration part of it. And when we talk about inspiration, we focus on model images. And we have our own photo studio, which is really nice, and our guys are always shooting great pictures. And one thing they always keep in mind is when the customers go in there, the images, the model images that you see, it's also diverse. So it's not biased towards a particular kind of skin tone or body shape and all those things. So that kind of made us think a little bit. Especially for today, when I was looking for the whole diversity and bias part of it, I was thinking, okay, we are constantly talking about bias, and bias is nothing but the intuition that comes from people. That's pretty much it. Over the kind of experience you've had in your life, it's basically your intuition. So when we are talking about machine learning models and when we're talking about bias there, one thing is the machine learning models are created by us as humans. So we are the ones who are providing it the logic in the form of models and also the knowledge in the form of data. So we as data scientists, data engineers, whoever is working on the machine learning models are responsible to make sure that the kind of data that we put in there, it covers that whole diversity and bias part of it. So going back to the photo part of it, the inspiration part of it, our lead data scientist, who's also here, sitting here, we have been working on a particular machine learning model, which is about generating more model images. So one thing that we kept in mind while working on it is we have to have the kind of data set in a more diverse way. So when we are generating these models, it's again not biased to a particular body shape or skin tone, so we can provide better models which can provide better inspiration along with the clothes. That's what we are doing. That's one of the things. And apart from that, we are also looking at the beauty concepts and all those things. There also, we are very careful about it. So when we touch the beauty part of it, where we sell a lot of cosmetics, we were taking a step back, and we decided to do a bit about a data design process within the team itself. It was nothing, there was no one from legal or ethical team involved in that. It was simply us, the data scientists, myself as a product manager. So what we do there is we look at, okay, what is the kind of problem that we want to solve with our machine learning model? Okay, we know what we want to solve, but do we have all kind of data or data set to solve every aspect or every use cases? And whatever data that we pick, and the kind of data we pick could be a public data, it could be from our own internal system, and also from our customer data that we pick. How we look at the pros and cons of it, how is it going to work out, and not just like pros and cons, but we also look at it from an ethical aspect. Is it the right set of data to use it, how to use it, and we also work closely with our legal team as well in this aspect, just to run it through them. So this is a bit about our process on how we work with it, and how we are very careful about, as people, how we are very careful about adding proper diversity and bias in there. So this is our process while creating it, and once our machine learning model is in production, for example, recently we put our ranking model in production, which is for our product list page. There we were like, okay, the model is in production, we have done our homework, it should work great. But as we started seeing it, it did well from a relevancy aspect, but we could see from a performance aspect, it wasn't doing that great. So right now, it's not just about human intuition or just process and stuff. So we wanted to look up for tools with which we can identify some bias. And that's where we came up with the open source tool, which is out there, Shipley. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. So it's an open source tool with which you can really identify the feature importance. So that is something that we used in our ranking model. And with that, we were able to actually explain to our business as well, like, okay, you're seeing this kind of result because this particular feature has got more importance. And this is how it's going to drive this whole journey for the customer. So that gave us a bit of an idea that because we want to move more towards personalization, that we would be using more Shipley, which can help us identify this whole bias part of it in our feature and how we can fine tune it. So these are the kind of things that we are doing currently, and we are looking forward to do more, and we are very careful about things.
Yeah, so you have to bring a ton of intentionality in order to get the results that you're comfortable with.
Yeah. That's very true. It's about like educating our people as well. So this is not something, you read a lot of things, you talk to a lot of people. I think this was a bit of a trigger from when we were especially working on the photo studio part of it. You look at certain images and you're like, oh yeah, the dress looks okay, but yeah, the model, does it fit properly, and all those things. And plus, you read a lot of things, and then you say, oh, okay, so when you're searching for certain things, you say, oh, there is a bit of a bias there, how could that happen? So you bring all those things in, and I just try to educate my team as well with the same thing, and my team is super open about things like that, so it helps.
Wonderful. Another area to turn where you have to bring a lot of intentionality is to get diverse and inclusive results internally at each of our companies, so that we work on teams that we feel comfortable in and represented by. And so, Devin, what's your sort of, especially if you're not an upper level executive, how do you recommend like helping to influence the right culture?
It's a good question. I think one of the things that I really like that we did at Lloyd's this year, so we were trying to get more women particularly into our technical roles, so data scientists, data engineers, and so on. But we actually partnered up with an external meetup group. So we're quite lucky in London that there's a big women in tech meetup scene, lots of different groups out there. So we ended up partnering up with one of those to run an internal event. So we sponsored it, brought in like pizza and the drinks and everything, got everyone together, and got people up on stage kind of talking about what they do. And as a result of that, there was a big increase in the amount of women that we had applying to our technical roles. And I think, so it just kind of shows that you've got to change the process. You've got to go out there and find those people rather than kind of sitting back and expecting them to come to you. is I think one of the things we did originally was looking at the job ads themselves and saying, is there any gendered language in there? Are we kind of posting them in the right places? But even then, we weren't getting, people applying to the jobs. So I think you have to change the way you think about it and kind of go out there and find those people, and that worked really well.
Wonderful. Mamta, I know that I never, when I was growing up as a little girl, expected to be on a stage in Amsterdam talking about unified analytics. This was not a part of my life I predicted. I understand that early in your career, you made some sort of dramatic life choices, made a leap of faith. Tell me about how you did that, how you worked up the courage,
So what Stacey is referring to is my choice to do a PhD in the UK. And in that respect, I had to make a lot of choices. A traditional Indian girl deciding that against all norms where you're supposed to get married and settled, also have a career, but rather chose to follow my dreams.
Yeah.
So I had a whole lot of things going for me, I should first of all say, because not everyone's lucky. I feel I was lucky. Yes, you have talents. Yes, you work hard, like all of us do, but also the support that comes from family and the people whom you meet along the way. So I was a teacher first. I love physics, answering the questions as to why things work the way they do. So you need social stability. One of the things my parents always instilled was that you have to stand up for yourself. And I think that's very important. No one else can take care of yourself like you can do yourself. So treat yourself kindly, that's what I would say. So during that choice, I made a choice to get a salaried income. So I started working from being a teacher to actually working for the Ministry of Defense as a research scientist. Yes, gazetted officer, I can put a stamp on people's certificates and sign my name. Very cool. Until 6 months in, I was like, I'm going to be doing research here. And what is it going to go towards? For me, it didn't sit well that the work that I was going to contribute to was going to go into weapon technology. That is a conscious decision. At the same time, I was lucky enough to have applied for a PhD in just doing what I liked, which was basically asking the question, why things work the way, but it has to have a value. So I wanted to work in solar energy, clean energy. So I applied to the semiconductor physics group and got accepted. The condition was I didn't have funding at that point in time. So then there was a decision over at that point where I had to say, you know what, if I don't get my PhD funding, I'm not going to go, because I do not want to take my parents into debt, because I wanted to do it on my own 2 feet. Luckily, I got funding, came to the UK, and that was again a big change, because I am burning my bridges by not working in India, resigning my job, resigning a rosy future to come into something unknown. And people ask me how you did it. I sometimes think, at that point, maybe I was stupid because I was following my heart and all the things that are around it. But a part of it is also plucking up that courage. And courage can have different forms. It's not just about very grand gestures, just turning up. I said, let's give it a try and see if it works or not. I can't predict the future because human beings are not that rational. That's the one thing that I can be sure of. So that brought me to the UK to do my PhD. So I would say, believe in yourselves and take a chance. You never know what's around the corner.
All right. And of course, you can always move to Amsterdam.
I can. I was actually here. I was in Amsterdam and I refused it. So I came for an interview with Shell after I finished my PhD. They said, let's try industry for a change. And they said, how would you like to work for Shell in Aberdeen? And I said, no, thank you. I cannot I don't like this. I want my son around, and the weather wasn't particular. So yes, I've been in Amsterdam. I came for an interview here and said no.
So you spoke about needing, courage to take a leap of faith. A lot of us feel like we need to have a lot of courage sort of on an everyday basis, talking to our managers about performance, promotion, how are we doing, asking for feedback, but being confident. Devin, do you have any advice for people about how to do that?
I think, so particularly around giving feedback, that's something we've been trying to tackle in our team, because I think we've kind of got used to this idea that feedback only comes from your manager downwards, so it will come from people like above you or whatever. And we've been trying to promote the idea that it should be, two-way, and it should be between everyone, so like peers as well. And I think, so we've had like a couple of sessions, for example, in team meetings talking about how to actually give effective feedback and how to do it, and to not think of it as criticism, because it's obviously a way of making yourself better. And one thing I really liked that I read was this idea that if you're going to give somebody critical feedback, you can phrase it as if you could be even better if you did these things. So it's that even better, which I quite liked. So yeah, I think you just have to, all of these things, so like feedback, if you are thinking about a promotion or whatever and you're trying to get to that point, just take all of the opinions, all the feedback you can get and think of it as something that's making you better. You've got to try not to take it too personally, which is easier said than done, I think.
Right. So Carolyn, lots of people in the audience at some point in their career think about becoming managers. When people talk to me about it, I always ask them, why? And then we talk about when and how. Yeah. What do you think, what are your thoughts on the great answers to those three questions? Like, why should people be doing it? When should they be doing it? And then how should they go about it?
Well, why is also a little bit on a personal level. What exactly you would like to do as a manager? At least for me, it was about, because I was more on the hands-on point with my previous jobs, and when I moved into the whole product manager role as well, I didn't have any experience with the machine learning part of it or the data science part of it. So I also had to ask myself why I want to do it, and for me the answer was pretty simple. I want to build great products, and I want to work hands-on again with a great team to build it. So that was my why. So it's also how you feel about yourself. It shouldn't be like, yeah, I want to be a manager because that's my natural course of career path where I want to manage people. But it's also important how you're going to manage those people, or what your role as a manager is going to be to enable them. That's one thing. And about how to go about with it, I think it's a bit of a learning curve. You should always have an open conversation, let's say with your manager, about, hey, I want to do something like this for this reason. I have this kind of skill set. You also have to look at yourself, what kind of skill set you have. Look at yourself and then say, okay, I have this kind of skill set. What do you think I should grow into so I can get into this kind of position? So more on a constructive way, and that would always work out. At least for me, it worked out. So I think.
Okay, Mamta, look, when we have these women's panels, one of the most common questions that gets asked is work-life balance. How do you juggle being a woman and having a career? Just to point out, you and I think both don't have children. So most of the times that answer has a lot to do with also being a mom. But I know that we talked about how sometimes the work-life balance expectations can be different for us. What are your thoughts there?
I think there are a couple of things you rightly pointed out, either not having children or you being single. There's a lot of expectations saying, oh, you don't have commitments after work, so you can stay the couple of hours later and finish the work. And it's always that person. It does happen. It's done not intentionally. It's very unconscious. When they say, hey, can you finish up this report and give it to me? Whereas I have to go now, my wife or my husband is waiting for me. And you're like, surely, I also have a life outside. I've got hobbies as well. And the best way to tackle that, I would say, is to have conversations with your male colleagues. And this is where when I say, I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you for all the men in the room, because this is not a one-way conversation. It's to have to happen both ways at different levels. The conversations around being, hey, I do have other commitments as well, and I'm my own person. I need my own me time. So how do you do that? A work-life balance doesn't necessarily mean 50-50. Yeah. You will have days where you have to suck it up, sorry for the language, and deliver, because we are not, at least in companies, we're not working towards a charity, right? You have deadlines, or you feel passionate about what you do, then you put in those hours. No one is asking you to do it, but you tend to do some of it. On another level, you also need to be able to say when is enough. Mm-hmm. If you can't say no, you can say no in an assertive fashion without being rude. So, and this also goes to a lot to do with the team, the environment in which it is, how comfortable or how safe do you feel in having those conversations. And for me, that's one of my chief criteria in when I want to work for a particular company is fit and the culture. So I don't know if that's answered your question.
It's a good answer. So speaking of feeling comfortable and sometimes having difficult conversations, I'm going to turn to Devin and ask her about microaggressions. Like, that can be an issue for lots of us in lots of different intersectional ways. Have you had to deal with that much, and what advice do you have?
Yeah, I'd say I do feel I've been quite lucky in that respect. So one of the things, I've got a bit of a reputation in the team for correcting people when they default to he, which happens a lot. So we've got a team of, I think, around 25 data engineers, and there are 5 female data engineers. So yeah, a lot of the time people will default to he, his work, his code or whatever. And for me, even though it seems like such a small thing, because it's just, it's no one's doing it deliberately, it just happens. And even I do that sometimes as well. But I think the impact, the kind of psychological impact that it has on people is quite big, because it's kind of saying that you're not really, an engineer, you're not really part of this team or whatever. So even though, yeah, it seems a small thing, I always try and kind of correct people when they do that. In terms of tackling it, I think it's hard. I think you have to be quite brave to call people out on it, particularly if it is your manager doing it. And I've done that a couple of times as well. But you always think, is it going to come back on you? You just don't know. It depends on the environment that you're in. So I think it helps to have other people that feel the same way. So allies, for example, that are also pointing out the same thing. And one thing that was brilliant is that when I did call my manager out on it, he kind of came and said, you're right, and thank you for doing that, and I'll stop. So yeah, you have to be brave in the first place, but it builds momentum, and other people start doing the same.
Mamta, I know you mentioned that your team now is actually extremely diverse.
Yes, it is indeed.
But I'm sure many times in your career you've been the only woman in the room, or sometimes the only person of color in a room.
Absolutely.
Potentially.
And the youngest as well.
Sure.
So it doesn't work. So you have, and in terms of tackling those situations, I think first thing to what Devin mentioned, you do need to have that courage to, first of all, understand what do you want to stand for. Do you want to be a doormat, or do you want to actually stand up for yourself? And the simple things you can do, I refuse to make coffee for anyone in the room. I refuse to take notes. I say so I was asked by one of our GMs, it was unconscious. We were all there in the meeting, and we were talking about average age about 50, all white, the token girl there, and different ethnic background, sitting there, and it just turned to me and said, would you mind taking notes? I said, I wouldn't mind taking it now if in the future when I'm in this meeting, everyone takes a turn to do that. So you do need to encourage that kind of behavior. So when you are trying in a conversation, or if you're running or chairing meetings, make sure that you don't set those roles. Yes, we need someone to take notes. Rotate that. Give everyone an opportunity to chair the session so they feel ownership. And always take care of the ones who are not at that level. So I wouldn't mind making tea for those who are a grade underneath me. I'm happy to serve, but definitely not to my superiors. Call me.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that I celebrate every victory at work with cake, but I have not once baked a cake at work. I have always ordered the cake. There's some excellent bakeries here in Amsterdam that deliver to my office. So that was one of the very small ways that I both got the celebration I wanted, but avoided sort of playing into some sort of very old-fashioned gender role myself. Also, I get a lot of cake that way. I'm very happy about it. Carolyn, what do you do to help drive culture, to make WACOMP feel inclusive? I mean, I know it's way out in Zwolle.
Yeah.
So for those in the audience, where is Zwolle? And what's it like there?
Well, it's part of Netherlands. It's in the northern part of Netherlands. You have to take a train for about 1 hour. And trust me, the train ride is really nice. So that's to start with. It's not even that crowded. And it's a very beautiful city. So that's also nice. And at WACOMP itself, of course, we want ourselves to be known better. So we set up a lot of talks, like meetups. We open up the gates for a lot of people because we did our transformation to online and recently to the cloud platform as well. We have a lot of great engineers, a lot of great managers who can share those insights. So we definitely do that, but also at WACOMP, they're open for international crowd. So they're doing their level best when they have to get people in. The only downside is, yeah, you have to travel a bit. So there is initiative from Baycamp a lot around those things as well, what they can do for people. Because if I'm talking about international crowd, especially in Netherlands, you really need that sponsorship as well to stay here and to live here. And that is something Waycamp is super happy to do for people. And for them, it's more about knowledge and how they can grow as an organization. And to grow as an organization, you need really fresh ideas, diverse ideas. So, yeah.
I'm actually going to put this to both Carolyn and Mamta. I think I've talked to both of you about this, is pay disparity analyses and how you choose the right data set. Which of you, because one of the top issues for women is, are we getting paid the same as our peers? And so now it's become this sort of increasing trend to try and run corporate pay disparity analyses or national pay disparity analyses, but the data set you use and how you weight things can be so impactful on the results.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Not really, because how I see it at Waycamp, we don't really have that gender parity for the pay part of it.
All right.
So it's really fine. So
Right.
Mamta
Mamta,
can go
maybe
for
we were talking about that.
So I think, disclaimer, I'm not working with that data set. So I work with engineering data sets. So to talk about pay disparity, again, it has to be a conversation. And I just feel that the first step towards making that better is to have an awareness. And luckily, or unluckily, we happen to be in the UK where it is mandated that if you have to publish your pay grades, pay scales, I think if it's 25 or 200 or more, you have to publish that. So you can have data you can ask for the data. So in the way we handled it was our chief people officer actually spoke about it in honesty, saying that yes, there's a disparity. But again, as a scientist, I would look at it like, how would you look at the numbers, right? Because your data can skew depending on if you have one or two senior C-level folks and a majority of your workforce or your staff are just young graduates. Right? So for the conversation to be had meaningfully, what we ended up doing is looking at the data sets separately and having those conversations in the business units. Yeah. At which point you start asking, is this across seniority? And then out of that comes out activities. Yeah. It's not just enough to talk about it and look at the data set in a meaningful manner, but also say, so what now? Yeah. Right? And we hold our senior managers to account saying, okay, so we discussed this, what next? How does this reflect? And one of the things we look at is we started asking questions about how many female folks have got promotions, right? And that has been reflected. There's been about 20% increase in promotions across ARM in the last 2 years since pay disparity was openly discussed. Yeah. So that's my little bit about you hold your end, you have those conversations.
Okay, wonderful. I'm actually going to admit I ran out of questions, so I'm going to, and I don't think we actually brought a microphone. So, Devin, what's the question you wish I had asked you just now?
I suppose something that might be interesting for people is like perhaps how to transition into these kind of roles, because so I mentioned earlier that I didn't have like a traditional technical background. Sure. And a lot of the kind of volunteering work that I do is with a meetup group. So it's called the Artificial Intelligence Club for Gender Minorities. Sure. And we have a lot of people joining that, are usually women, but not only, that want to kind of transition into data science or whatever, but just don't know how to do it. And I think because we work in this field, we know how quickly it changes. It's not always easy to even give an answer. So yeah, I suppose about that. And my advice for that would just be that getting involved in those kind of communities. So I think things like this, so coming along to events like this, fantastic. And also like local meetups and things like that. And at Lloyd's, for example, we have like an analytics community, we call it, again, is another way. So I think obviously learning the knowledge, like studying, learning to code and so on is one part of it, but building that kind of community around you of people that are interested is also really important. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of my top tips, really.
Did you find a community of people you were comfortable with when you first started going to those, or did you feel like you sort of stood out?
I specifically chose women-focused groups for that reason. I don't think I would have felt very comfortable perhaps going to the others because I would have definitely stood out. But I think you do have to try a few, so don't be disheartened if you go to one and you're like, oh, this isn't great. Yeah, because they're not all made equal, so don't worry about that. But yeah, try them out, go to different ones. And different sizes as well. I personally like the really small ones, so try those as well.
Okay, awesome. Same question to you, Mamta. What should I be asking you about?
I would probably talk about what does it take to have a successful analytic project or a program in any company.
Sure.
The reason why it's close to my heart is because data science is the hype. And I personally think that anyone who can code is immediately conceived as someone who is a data scientist. But I would say, don't think about functionalities, you need roles. I introduced myself as a data translator. What does that mean? That means that I can translate a business need into saying, how can I get value from data? So I do take objection to when you say data-driven decisions. So what? But is it meaningful? Is it of value?
Yeah.
And there's a cost-benefit analysis as well. Mm-hmm. So by the same token, anyone can do things. If you have great communication, you can bring people together. You are data savvy, you can be a data translator. Yes, I do have a science background, and I have modeled data, but that's not the only thing that helps. Equally important are what I call as data psychologists. I wouldn't call them data whisperers, because that would mean that you are trying to manipulate data and say something which is not it is. When I talk about data psychologists, what I mean is that if you are curious and you want to know why the data is telling you something like that, and you're able to model to as near life as you can to behaving, like forecasting or anomaly detection, but actually delve a bit more deeper, understanding the assumptions, then you are a data psychologist. So it's not sufficient that you have only coding skills and are able to model. You need to understand, go to the roots of it and understand the assumptions, how people will use it. So you have to look at it in a socioeconomic context. And the third, which is the most important one, are the data storytellers. Yeah. How do you take them on the journey? How do you say that data tells your story? So today you had an excellent, which I thought I got moved by, was about how AI or ML can be used in wildlife preservation, especially with snow leopards. Yeah. So how do you tell that data? Because now more than ever, especially when the divide between society and scientists is around communication, you have to be able to tell that story. So if you can do that in a meaningful and relatable way to the audience, you can transition. So that goes towards some of the things as to like, you don't have to think about that, oh, I can't do that kind of work. You need to figure out what are your strengths and what can you bring to the table that others might not have.
Yeah.
So.
Beautiful. All right. Here's a surprise. Same question, Carolyn. what would you like to tell everyone?
Well, this is something I was talking to the other panelists before the panel itself, and one of the things that we were talking about was literally about learning. Like, when would you stop learning, or continuous learning itself? And that kind of triggered me right now, because I started to look back a little bit about my own life as well, because I grew into this role of this whole product manager part of it. But if I look at my whole 10 years of how I grew as well, it was with continuous learning. There was not like one moment where I stopped learning new things, and also learning things so you can keep up with the trends as well. So I think it's really important to do that. And for me, I moved from being a tester to coding things, and then eventually into the whole data science part of it. And that took a lot of my time as well, like my spare time to really learn. So it's just, you need to understand where your passion lies, and sometimes it is a little bit harder, of course, but you should never give up. You should just put in a little bit more hard work. And also, you have a lot of nice colleagues, and just be open to them that this is what you want to do, and tell them there's always people that are going to help you out with it. So that is something that I really wanted to just mention. Yeah.
I am now going to open it up to the audience for questions. If you state a question, I'll try and repeat it to make sure everybody else can hear you. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for
is for women working in technology, but there are all levels, so from managers, developers, data scientists, data, I don't know, everything. It gives the opportunity to connect with people internationally. So I mean, people from all countries, from New Zealand, from USA, from Europe, and the main language communication is English. There are several Slack channels, so it depends on your level of seniority.
Yeah.
And I want to share with you, I'm a Women Tech Maker ambassador, so
Okay.
became recently. If you have any questions, you can reach me, and I give you all
Okay.
the details, information you need. And then my questions.
Sure.
First question is from Carolyn mentioned about
Yeah.
the bias that is on data, and I am a bit worried about it because our society has this bias, okay, and
Yeah.
we are collecting the data from the society, from the people. So obviously that bias is in the data, and if we train our models with that data, then our models are going to be biased as well.
Mhm.
So then when I have had this conversation with people, they said, yeah, but that's the real data. So if you manipulate the data, you correct the data, then you are not putting the reality into the data. But I say, yeah, but what if the reality is wrong? You need to correct that, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a bit worried how to do that in a way that people or society will accept that. And I want to hear your ideas or suggestions. I know there are already a couple of approaches by IBM or Intel or Accenture, I think, about
Yeah.
measuring the ethical of your algorithms and ethics in the algorithms as well. And the other question is about the conscious bias, but what about the unconscious bias in people that is not reflecting on the data?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about ethics and bias in data? Because all of our data is created by biased humans.
Yeah, I think to answer that, recently, yeah, a lot of big companies as well see that as one of the biggest problem. And as you said, a lot of companies are coming up with audit tools around it. And one of the points that you mentioned there was people say, yeah, let the data do, this is the realistic data, let the data do the talking. And that is also something that I've heard often from people, yeah, let the data do the talking, let that do the talking, but it's not that way. You always have to put the guardrails around it to make sure that it is saying the right thing and it is giving you with lesser bias and more on the diversity level. And I think, yeah, you have a lot of tools out there, but it's also a conscious choice, like it's a learning for the people. Like for me, as a manager, I'm responsible for my team to create things which is not so much bias. So it's more, I feel it's a bit on the process level from the beginning itself, how you see it. I hope that answers your question.
You need to educate people.
Exactly.
To understand the
Yeah, yeah. Because in my company, let's say in a lot of companies, we have the legal team, security team, ethical team, which is constantly being that police of, yeah, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But it is just not their responsibility. I think at this point of time, it becomes the responsibility of each of the individual who's actually working on things like this. And we should stop saying stuff like, yeah, let data do the talking. We should always think the data is set up by people. So it's people who are doing the talking.
All right. Mamta, what do you think about correcting data for bias?
Correcting data for bias. Wow, that's out of the blue. So luckily, at least so far, I haven't had to think about that problem, partly because the data set I work with is around machines. So what it comes, so you do look for data anomalies. That's a different thing. As a researcher, I have always looked for data anomalies. And it is a very pertinent question today, a discussion that I have with my team and also with people who deal with data. First of all, I would say anyone who wants to go into the realm, please learn a little bit of stats. Correlation is not causation. Design your experiments properly. Think about the area you're going to be designing it in and what the implications are of and how it's going to be used. Again, because when we talk about data, we only talk about data. We forget to say, and we talk around the ownership of data, right? You don't give up, but I would say start having conversations, and thankfully legislations are coming in around the inferences made out of that data and how that is put to use. So I'm okay with giving them my data, that's fine. What are they going to do with it? It's already there, you can't erase all your electronic footprint. What I am interested in, the inferences they make with that. So how do you then control the profiles of a user you might have had, Amazon has, for instance, or some other companies have of you, right? How is that put to use? A user should have the right to go and exploit all their data if they want to. But that takes not just the public conversation and awareness, but also the might of the government to put policies in place to help with that.
Devin, do you also have to deal with human-generated data that can contain a lot of different forms of bias?
Yeah, I suppose naturally, like customer data, for example, and working in a bank, you have to make decisions, obviously, about who you lend money to, for example. That's kind of the classic one where bias comes in. But I think that's a really interesting, almost like philosophical argument, this correcting data, because I don't think it's good enough to just say, oh, but it's there. That kind of matches reality, like you were saying. So, for example, I don't know, somebody that lives in a poor area that you wouldn't lend to them. Just because that's the way it is doesn't mean that it's the way it should be. So yeah, I think it's a real opportunity to correct some of that stuff. But it feels like too big a decision or too big a responsibility for kind of individual teams to make. And I guess that's why governments are beginning to look at things like that and come up with like ethics charters and so on. So yeah, but kind of my default is that I'm not comfortable with that idea of, oh, but that's how it is, so we should just leave it that way. But yeah, it's an interesting point. So
if I may add something to that, one of the things that we talk about in ARM is that when you look at data, it has to be both qualitative and quantitative. This is where when I was talking about that model, anyone who deals with models being a psychologist, you have to look at your data because if you're not in the room to give your context, how are you going, because you might look at the data differently and interpret it differently to how I would look at it based on my training, my experiences, right? So there is that conversation which is already in the industry about how do you make machine learning interpretable, right? And along with those conversations should be that you just don't look at data, but also the context in what it's used, qualitative and quantitative together. And maybe a third dimension. You talk about value, do no harm, right? Before you want to try and fix the world. At least don't make it worse than what it was.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Any other, I see.
Following up on the same discussion, because we are talking about bias with the data, but I feel like it depends on who's looking at it, because like it could be a bias, but there could also be a characteristic of that data at the same time. So it depends on like who, but it becomes a difficult question that what is bias in reality, because for me, like it could be like one thing that is biased, but for the other team it's another thing that is biased. So how do you make decisions on these kind of things?
Well, I mean, if it is too big a decision for any one person or any one team, it's important to have a diverse group of voices in the room and to make very intentional conversations and choices about things like that, because it is at the end, you know, when you are correcting or when you are curating a data set like that, it is a political and intentional choice. But at the same time, I don't want to train a racist chatbot, right? And so if you just let the internet train your chatbot, I think we all saw that it took less than a day for it to be just spewing hatred. And so you know, at some point, you do have to make choices. There's no objective neutrality available to us. Yeah. Any other questions in the audience? Okay, I see you here, fourth row.
So this is more of team management.
Sure.
So you work with a mixed group, both men and women, and there are many instances where I've noticed in my teams where women are a bit hesitant in terms of putting themselves out for an opportunity, though you know from their performance that they're really good and they can definitely do that job quite well or better than the rest of the group. So in such situations, how do you really handle your team? In many cases, conversations work, but the same proportion doesn't work as well. So it's like.
Okay. All right, I'll just repeat the question to make sure the back row could hear that. So statistically, we've definitely seen, I think Google published some of these results, when you have a self-nomination, self-promotion type of system, women statistically nominate themselves at much lower rates. And so I know that the approach that they took was to push managers to sort of correct their nomination rates by, both encouraging the women and then sometimes nominating them for them. And I know that this applies not just to women, underrepresented minorities, but also sometimes introverts of any gender or background. And so I'll just pass the question around. I'll start with you, Carolyn. Do you do anything to help the quieter folks on your team to make sure that they are rewarded appropriately, particularly in terms of promotions?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of conversation, as simple as that. It can go a long way, the kind of questions you ask them. Where do you want to head to? Why do you want to head there? And where do you think you stand at this moment? Sometimes people are just happy and they say, I'm fine with it, but just don't let that stop you, asking more questions, because I think as a manager, it's also your responsibility from a management aspect to understand that part of the human psychology as well and say, okay, this team member is a bit of an introvert, this team member is a bit of an extrovert. So you need to make sure that you've collected all your data points in both these cases to have the right conversation with them, to make them open up a little bit. So I think you have to give a little bit more try there as a manager.
Mamta, do you have issues with this as well?
I won't say issues, but there is activity. From a personal perspective, I like a challenge.
Sure.
That's what gets me up in the morning to work with brilliant, smart folks. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But equally, it also comes with the price of understanding the area that I work in needs a whole different mindset.
Yeah.
Right? It's data science. I'm talking about only this industry and this particular subset. You're talking about system level thinking. You're talking about design thinking, because no one person can do it on their own. You are bringing a whole lot of capabilities in. When a situation like that arises, you start then asking, who's the right person for it? Right? And be very aware of your biases as well. And there are ways of how do you then match the person and the capabilities to that particular project. Earlier, most companies, it can be done unconsciously by saying, hey, he's good, he's volunteers, let's give it to him. I'd say, hey, that is the easiest way. We human beings tend to do that because inherently we are lazy. We work with stereotypes or whatever comes easy to us. Put in a little bit more effort, figure out what are the projects that needs to be done, who's working on it, have honest conversations. Me personally, we have quarterly reviews of what's on our roadmaps because we're an agile company, that's how we work. So we look at what needs to be done, and I look at the team and say, hey folks, any interest in any of these things? Get the conversation going. Think about also a personal development. So I would say you go into any company, think about the culture, and please hold your managers also accountable to an extent, saying that, hey, this is what I think my objectives are. And to be successful in this, these are my development plans. So unless that kind of a conversation happens, it is a lot of effort.
Yeah.
We're not going to make sure that we get the opportunities. And opportunities is what we want for everyone over there to grow as a person.
I think the answer to every question today has been you have to make intentional choices and sort of look beyond the easiest, most obvious answer. Kind of in every decision you make, and whether that's the data choices you use, whether it's the people you put up for promotion, whether it's the people you give the big shiny project. That's just the consistent pattern I'm hearing in pretty much every answer. Devin, same question to you though. Do you see this kind of differential, sort of self-promotion rate, and do you have to encourage people as well?
Yeah, definitely. I manage people at work as well, and I've certainly had to push some of them to say, I think it's almost that it's nice if somebody recognises like a skill or a strength that you have, but sometimes we, and I think again particularly as women, think that we're not ready for things yet. So I'm not quite ready for this. But if somebody else says, well, I think you are, it just gives you that much more confidence. And then I think often the only way to get ready for something is to just do that thing. You'll never perhaps be ready for certain things. So yeah, I think you have to be very, very proactive about it and kind of challenge people and push them. And obviously some people more than others. And certainly my manager's been very good at doing that. So I would have said I wasn't ready to manage anyone. But he was like, well, here you go, here's some people to manage. And you just have to then, you have to get over all of that. I think you then, what's the word, like leapfrog your own anxieties, I suppose. And sometimes you need that. Obviously, it can go too far as well. You don't want to give people things that they're genuinely not ready for. But you're usually ready before you think you are. So.
It sounds like it actually goes back to something you said even earlier about recruiting. Like, I don't know if this is anecdata or a real number, but women feel like they need to meet 90 or 95% of the bullet points in a job description before they're willing to apply. Men see 50, 60, they're like, that's my job, right? It's so, or less, okay. And so sometimes, like I know we've been talking about rewriting our job descriptions in order to try to reduce that self-application bias. And of course, we send a ton of people out sourcing to try and find people to apply who don't realize that they are qualified. So I'm just sort of tying that back to something you said earlier about doing meetups and doing recruiting to get that diverse candidate pool. Is that also something that where you are pushing women or anyone to consider becoming data engineers that don't realize they're ready to make that leap?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we've all kind of seen those job ads that are literally a laundry list of different things. And yeah, I hate that because I will also look at it and go, I can't do like 95% of I can't do all of these things. But I think, yeah, you just have to, because usually when you hire for a job, even if it is a very technical one, the technical part of it is only still part of the job. There's all this other stuff around it. So particularly if you are transitioning into that from another field, there's transferable stuff there. It's all, the emotional intelligence, the soft skills, and all of that is important in any job. So yeah, but the way we write our job ads, sometimes you wouldn't know that by reading them. So I think sometimes, yeah, by having these events and kind of going out and speaking to people, you obviously get a better sense of who they are as a person. And yeah, it gives them, I suppose, not an advantage, but just makes them realize there is more to the role and you're looking for more than just a laundry list of skills.
Wonderful. I think I'm going to call a stop to today's conversation. If any of you would like to talk to us further, we'll be up here for a few minutes, or you can seek me out anytime today or tonight. I'd love to talk to all of you individually and more, but I also want to give people a chance to take care of some errands and check their email before heading down to the next round of keynotes. So thank you, everyone, Carolyn, Mamta, Devin, for coming to this.